Melissa and Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Aiden.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, this is, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. You both are very obvious guests for such a podcast that talks about management and leadership. You were, I think, to a large extent, pioneers in teaching management through things like social media and newsletters and the blog and your writing and all of this. And I think, like, to get started, I'd love for you to tell the audience how you both got very interested in management.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So Jonathan and I both come from 20-year careers in technology. And when we were first getting rolling, we got promoted very similar times. We were working at Mozilla in the very early days of Firefox, and we both started as individual contributors. And as the organization grew, our teams grew. And as our teams grew, we were really sort of thrown into the deep end and told, like, you'll figure it out. This story is so common in technology organizations. But at the time, we sort of thought it was a product of how fast Mozilla was growing, how fast the web was growing.
Yeah, you can tell yourself this story that it's situational. Obviously other companies would be more intentional and careful about this stuff, right? It's a big deal. There's a lot of new skills to learn. Maybe it's because we were an open source project. Maybe it's because we were growing faster than we expected to, right? We weren't a standard startup. We didn't have VCs that were going to give us that advice. No, turns out none of that's true. Turns out almost every organization that's growing quickly is field promoting people, giving them management responsibilities based on what? Based on their individual competence, right? You're a good engineer. You don't seem to be a sociopath, so we're going to have you manage some engineers, like whatever it is. But not giving them the skills necessary to be great at that job.
And I think for both of us, we sort of came up through the, like, you'll figure it out, like you're clever, you'll sort it out eventually path, and then got to the point where we were running sort of executive roles in fast moving startups and realized, like, this is entirely learnable stuff. This is stuff that not only can you learn, but you can skip a lot of the, like, banging your head against the wall until it's bloody phase.
Yeah, it's sort of, it was a mix of, like, we had energy about it, but also we were frustrated by it. Like, to watch people have to learn this from a blank piece of paper over and over again. There's one thing where it's like, oh, the learning curve, everybody's got to climb that curve, but the people on your team are suffering while you're climbing that curve, right? And you started to hear more and more stories, louder and louder, about people really having a bad employment experience. And so much of it to us, without making excuses, so much of it to us was at least partially explained by those bosses not knowing what they were doing or what was expected of them.
And specifically, the frustration when we were getting started was that the loudest voices on this stuff were either coming from academia, where they were sort of studying organizational design, but not necessarily specific to startup, and would put out research that sort of fell down when you tried to apply it within an organization, or it was from the venture capital community, where a lot of the folks who were sitting and had, like, a bird's eye view of what was happening with technology startups hadn't operated in a very long time. And so when they would make assertions about what it was like to manage and lead in a growing startup, it felt really flat. It felt really out of touch and out of date. And for us, we said, like, that isn't our lived experience, and nobody out there is talking about what it feels like to actually try and lead in a fast growing org.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think very relevant. And you are right. Like, we don't invest in a lot of leadership training in general, or, like, it tends to be like a one and done thing. Oh, we need to do leadership training. Let's, do this one thing. And then now people are trained, like, let's move on. I'm curious
There's,
how it
like,
also.
no dirtier words in startup, right? Than, like, you're going to management training, right? A lot of folks find that, like, the response internally when you're told that you're rolling out a program like that is, like, crossed arms, lean back, sort of frustrated,
Very
like,
skeptical.
very skeptical. And we get it. We were also very skeptical.
And we see that all the time. Like, when we start with a new group of bosses, there's always somebody just sitting back in their chair, right? Even now that it's all remote, they're sitting back and they're not sure if this is going to be garbage or not, because their expectation is not only that, like, I have to learn this as I go, but that anybody trying to teach me is going to give me a bunch of stuff that isn't very useful.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And so what is it that you tell those people that are kind of leaning back, cross-armed in their chair? Like, why should they listen when you're up there and running one of your programs?
I think like you can't sort of bang your head on the table or bang your hand on the table and say, well, listen to me because I'm credible, because I've worked with thousands of leaders. Like it doesn't matter if you don't think that it's going to apply to your work. The most valuable thing we can do is teach you something on Tuesday, have you go try and apply it on Wednesday, find that it works, and have you come back hungry to learn more. Like that is the credibility is in the practical application.
Yep, that's it. The nice thing about working mostly, we don't work exclusively with startups, but it's a lot of who we work with. The nice thing is that there's this culture of like, I can just go learn it, right? That if this isn't useful, I can drop that tool, I can pick up some other tool, right? So there's an openness to learning new ideas. What they need to do is figure out like, are we bringing useful tools to the conversation, or are we bringing like personality tests and horoscopes and a bunch of stuff that they can't really attach to? And that struggle you can get over really quickly. You just show, don't tell, right? You don't say like, we're credible, or you should listen to us because we ran big teams before. You just say like, how are your one-on-ones going? Do they feel awkward and sort of useless? Do you not really know what they're for? Let's talk about how to know whether they're working or not. Like, what's some feedback that you're sitting on right now that you haven't given other people in your organization? Like, why is that? Let's talk about how to structure that in a better way. And they go through the process and they're like, oh crap, that actually would be much more useful. I'm going to go try that tomorrow because it's solving a real problem they have.
And for a lot of organizations, when like your management and leadership is the thing that's most on fire, you know it because your team basically like you double in size, but you have half the output. That's a management problem, right? Like if you have sort of twice as many resources in terms of like the humans actually typing on keyboards, but half as much work is getting done, that's usually a time where people know it's time to call us.
Although, it's funny that it's true. People do call us, but they don't always diagnose it. Right. So they'll say something like, my team's moving really slowly, or my team is infighting, right? There's different people working on different things. They lack a sense of urgency. They're just sort of in their own little bubbles. And we say, well, how's your goals process? And they're like, well, we tried OKRs and the first quarter they worked, and the second quarter, I think engineering still does them, but we sort of let them fall off. And we're like, so let's walk you through that, right? That often they can name the problem without really understanding what's underlying it. And when you give them those tools with a framework that says like, this is how this thing accomplishes this thing for your business, it starts to all click together. It's the best thing for us to watch those skeptics lean forward, because they want there to be something useful here. They don't want their job as a manager to be like a scam, right? But they've encountered a bunch of really awful management writing or contradictory tools, and they just need some clarity.
Yeah, I love that. So, and that's a good kind of point to take, which is if you have increased in size and your output seems to have slowed down, it's not because that's just what happens with scale, and maybe that's something that's acceptable, and that's worthy of note, and probably a management problem. Well, one thing I wanted to do though was just go back to your earlier careers. I mean, today you teach thousands of leaders. Management lessons. You've written a book called How Fucked Up Is Your Management, which is an awesome title. You've done all these things, but I'm curious if we were to go back to your early careers, and you talked about it being painful for teams to kind of sit back and be subject to you learning and climbing up this learning curve. What were some of the mistakes that you each made early in your careers that you obviously have now corrected?
Man,
you want me to go first?
Sure.
All right. Early in my management career, I found it really uncomfortable to be a boss. It's a really uncomfortable thing for a lot of people. This shift from going from I'm a peer, we work together and there's no power dynamic, to I'm now in charge of you. There's an inclination to give that power away as quickly as possible. And so the first time I managed somebody who was more senior than me in career experience, and more senior than me in age, as quickly as possible, I wanted to be like, nothing's changed. You just do what you do. It's great, but I will just sort of step on and sort of be on the sidelines and not really manage. And I think anytime you as a leader, or at least for my own career, anytime I as a leader specifically put down aspects of management and said like, those are tools that are management tools, but I'm not going to use them, there's a good kick to ask why. And so in terms of things I got wrong really early on, just pretending that the power dynamic didn't exist was a big mistake.
For me, we talk with so many bosses, and some of them have had really horrendous management experiences of their own. But for me coming up, I didn't. My default experience, I had 4 or 5, maybe 6 different managers before I got my first management gig. And the word I would use for all of them was just sort of apathetic, right? They just didn't take management very seriously. They'd show up for the occasional one-on-one. It's like eating your vegetables. They knew they had to do it. But like, I was really the one pushing for any change in my role, in my work, whatever. And I said to myself, I remember thinking, the first day I become a manager, I'm going to be better than they ever were, because I'm going to give a shit. That's it. I'm just going to care. And in the process of caring, I'm going to show up for my people really differently than my own bosses have shown up for me. And I did. I had long searching one-on-ones. I gave him lots of feedback, lots of opportunity for growth. Congratulations, Johnathan. What a great boss you are. I had run to the other side of the boat. I was like utterly ineffective at giving them feedback when they screwed up. I was utterly ineffective at holding them accountable for missed deadlines, for missed commitments to other teams, because I was so focused on the relationship and them having the experience of a caring and involved boss that I'd lost the plot on effectiveness for my team and like what we were accountable for and whether I was pushing them. And that was a hard thing for me to unlearn, right? How do you step back into holding those people accountable and not worry that you're going to jeopardize the relationships you just spent so long building, particularly with people who used to be your peers. Like it took me work to undo that one and realize that doesn't hurt my working relationship with those people. It just makes the boundaries clearer. But it's easy for me to spot that as a mistake now.
I feel like both of what you said have similarities in that, you, Melissa, wanted to not necessarily, you wanted to like give away control as soon as you got it. And I feel like there's a lot of relatedness to holding people accountable. And I find that it is also particularly challenging if you do have someone who is senior in years or in experience than you. How did you both turn it around? Like, how did you realize that, Johnathan, you were being too friendly, and Melissa, you weren't taking the control? Like, how do you pivot out of that kind of situation if you happen to be in it?
For me, it took a while, but for me, I started to really internalize, like, wait a minute, I'm being paid to do a job. It probably wasn't until I was a director, honestly, that the penny dropped for me. I'm being paid to do a job. I got a bunch of people on payroll as part of my organization, and we're here to do something, right? I started to be involved in directors meetings and be asked by my peers in directorship and above what my team was committed to, right? And how we were going to deliver that. And the more I started to engage with, like, oh crap, like, if I have 14 people on payroll in a startup, fully costed, even back then, that's a couple $1 million that the organization is spending to get what, right? And as I started to be in conversation with my peers in management, that's when I realized, like, I have an obligation here to the organization. I have things that I'm being paid to get done for us. And then I would turn around to my team and be like, wait a minute, we're not going to get these things done. And how do I do that? And sort of pulling that into conversation and saying, like, yes, my relationship with my team is a superpower. It means I can ask a lot of them because they trust me, but I need to get clearer on what I'm actually committed to. That for me was a real unlock, realizing that I had an obligation, not just to my people, not to be a shit umbrella. Like, you hear people use that language, right? I just got to insulate them. I just got to get everything out of the way so that they can focus on their work. That's part of it, but also that we're making a set of commitments. We're accountable to other parts of the organization to fulfill those commitments. And that, once I really let that in and started writing goals that advance the organization's goals instead of just writing down what my team was doing and calling those my goals, it was a real inversion for me, and a powerful one. It didn't hurt my relationships with my people. It gave them some stretch. It gave them a North Star.
Yeah. And I think for me, I think the mistakes that you're making because it's the first time you're doing something, often having an opportunity to like really just sort of to basically screw it up, then you're like, okay, well, I know what that mistake is. I'm not going to make it again. And I think the mistake of that peer to boss transition and not making those sort of roles and that power differential sort of better defined, you do that once. Ideally, you don't do that every time, right? And so I think for a lot of leaders, the challenge of sort of going from being in a peer relationship to being in a boss dynamic, once you've done it, then the next time you are more clear about it because you know the implications, you know the downside of it. And so for me, when I sort of walked into roles where I was hiring my team or where I had peers who sort of came into a management relationship with me, just being really clear in the first one-on-one of like, hey, like saying out loud, like, this is weird. We used to be peers. We're not peers anymore. And so here's what the expectations are and here's what's shifted. But I think for me, that pretend that nothing has shifted, it clearly had.
Yeah, if I connect those dots, I think the thing that we're both really saying is that you have to sit in the job. that it's a real job. And there's such a temptation, Melissa said it, there's such a temptation to pretend it's a fake one. I've heard so many bosses, I've been the boss, saying it's just a new business card. Like nothing really changes about the work that we're doing. Like I got to sit in more meetings than you do. But other than that, like you're the one doing the real work. I'm just administrative overhead. Like all of that stuff is a way of not owning what the job actually is. That like I have an obligation here. I've got work that I've got to do. It's legitimate work. And that work is around communication and coordination of effort, which is important, especially as an organization grows.
Yeah, I think so much good stuff falls out of sitting in it is a real job, and it's a real job that I can do well or poorly. Like we said it before, a lot of what we teach leaders how to do is how to assess whether it's going well or poorly. And that starting point of like, it's a real job. It is a set of discrete skills, and they're skills that you can get better at. You can sort of like, I think we work with heavy technical organizations who like to sort of take things apart and put them back together, and making it scrutable is one of the pieces that's really helpful for a lot of leaders. Is like, can I stare it down and say, how is it working? And if it isn't working, can we talk through what do I do instead?
Yeah. One of the things that you said, Johnathan, this management overhead concept, I sit in more meetings, you do the actual work. Why do you think that people just generally have this almost like distaste for management, especially like I feel, especially in technical organizations? But where does this come from? And why is it that we have this perception of managers in general? Is it just because we have so many bad bosses out there, or like, why is it?
I think that's half of it.
Yeah.
I think that like, would you want a business card that says like, that gives you the label that is the butt of every joke, and even if you sort of ignore that is often very ineffective, right? Like there are great engineers and poor engineers. There are great marketers and poor marketers, right? But many people have had an experience that involves a lot of really bad management. Even if they've had a great boss, they remember that person because they're such a standout, right? Because the people they reported to before and after that person were really mediocre. Like it's a weird thing that we do, that with the exception of MBAs, which is not quite the same as first line management anyway. Nobody goes to school for management. They go to school for whatever their individual discipline was, and then we elevate them into management, and we don't equip them, and then we act surprised that they're incompetent. I think that's one piece of it, and I think the other piece is the thing Melissa was talking about being really uncomfortable owning that power. That it's really, you want to do everything you can to not seem like you're putting yourself above other people, and you're not above them, but you do have power that you got to reckon with.
I also think like in terms of why specifically tech doesn't value management or historically has had a hard time valuing management, it's like so much of how we write our stories around how tech organizations come up, how startups are built, is like either like lone wolf in a dorm room, right? And there's not a lot of sort of priority on collaboration in that moment, right? Like if it's just me in a dorm room hacking on a computer, or me in a basement somewhere hacking on a computer, like there's not a lot of management in that story, honestly. And I think it's also one of the things where if you think about tech organizations as they grow, there are a bunch of things sort of early on where you're like 4 people around a table, right? And in that moment, there isn't a lot of management present in that moment. But as the organization scales, you hear this sort of more like it got to 150 people, it got to 200 people, it got to 1,000 people, and the wheel started feeling like they were coming off. And even in those moments, we don't ascribe that to being a management failure. We talk about that being a sort of byproduct of success. But I think it's because management is missing from a lot of how we tell our startup stories.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. One question that is kind of related is, you were saying that sometimes you're going to have a boss, and then you do comparing. Well, this boss is a lot better, a lot worse than who I had before, and then you may make some judgments based on that, and when you become a manager, take on certain qualities. But one of the questions I have is that, is it always that like is it possible that there's this thing of like a manager and kind of employee fit, like besides like this concept of a cultural fit? Is it possible that like sometimes that there isn't a fit between like a manager and employee, and it's not that it's a bad employee or it's not a bad manager, but maybe it's just like a bad fit for that team or the way that team happens to operate?
Sometimes. But the broader risk there in terms of like, if I've got a boss who says like, it's just not a fit, is that like what the reason that it's not a fit is that I have a bunch of assumptions in my head that I have failed to say out loud, and that person is bad at guessing them. And we see this all the time in organizations, that a lot of leaders, they make the first hire, and the first hire is in their own image. The first hire is somebody who thinks like them, may look physically like them, but certainly like came up through a path that is very similar to their own path. And that the more folks sort of deviate from that model, the harder time they have being managed by that person. So the shove for the leader in that moment is maybe you've got sort of a misfit or a misalignment there, but where have you done work to make sure that you're creating that your management style is one where a lot of different people can thrive within your organization? Because if you only have a leadership style that works for people who are like you've got some limitations, and I would say you've got some bias that you're bringing to the role. That's it.
It's not that it never occurs. It's that it's a really dangerous lens to, especially to apply to your own management, because you're going to use it as a rationalization. Like there's a great bit of danger in that you're gonna, that if I look at 1,000 cases of manager employee misfit, I boldly predict I'm going to see gender difference, I'm going to see racial difference, I'm going to see ability difference, right? That the people who just naturally I tend to vibe with are people where I share a great deal of life experience, and that the people that weirdly just happen to not be a good fit are the ones who come from a really different background, or who are dealing with a different sort of life context right now. And that it's not that it will never happen that a fully competent manager will just be not really compatible with how someone wants to be managed, but it's very rare, because a fully competent manager knows how to talk to different people and situate things and clarify expectations and not take for granted a bunch of those shared assumptions. And it's one of the things we say to the bosses we work with, like, most people show up wanting to do a good job at work. Sometimes you have someone who's just really, who's fried, who's burnt out, whatever it is, and just wants to sabotage the business. Most people want to do good work, to be recognized for good work, to collaborate with people that they respect, right? And so in most cases, a boss who's doing a clear job of articulating expectations and measures for success and stuff like that is going to find employees thriving. That's the danger. It's just, it becomes a rationalization. It becomes a tool for justifying exclusion with a different name.
And we talk to leaders about this idea of super fucking clear, right? Like, are you being super fucking clear? And like, not like, am I clear in my own mind, but like specifically like staring it down, like, did you say it in a way that was super fucking clear? And for a lot of leaders, like just getting practiced at, maybe that means I have to play a little bit with, like, I said it this way in this meeting, and I'm going to say it a different way the next time, just to make sure that I'm really communicating what I need to here.
Yeah, you're allowed to expect your people to show up like grownups at work. You're allowed to expect that if you hire, a bookkeeper, that they know about bookkeeping, right? But so many bosses have so many things that they consider to be obvious that they've never said out loud, right? Melissa wrote a post, that's a chapter in the book called "Obvious to You is Not the Same as Obvious." And that shove is really important for a lot of bosses, that you are going to take things for granted because of your time with the organization, because of your access to the CEO, because of your whatever it is, and be surprised when other people don't act on that obvious information. And it's always worth asking yourself, is that a professional failure on that person's part? Are they just not competent at the thing we hired them for? Or are they missing context that I have and that I've done a bad job of sharing?
I would love an example of super fucking clear. Like, if it's an imaginary one, if it's an anonymized one, of a situation where like maybe an expectation wasn't clear, and like, and how you go about the process of figuring out, because this is one of the hardest things, right? Like, it's not just like a human, like a relationship like issue. It's also like a business issue, right? Like, you go into business, you have this idea, you may have these assumptions, and maybe you haven't like clearly articulated to yourself or done the deep work of like, what are the assumptions we're making, in our business plan that we're not like outright saying. And I think it's probably the same in I guess work relationships. So yeah, if there is an example, would love to hear one.
Sometimes they're really small, right? So a lot of bosses avoid structure because it feels rigid and procedural and stuff. So they don't do things like have an agenda for a one-on-one or record action items coming out of it, right? But if you start doing that, it becomes pretty easy in our next one-on-one to check in and say, hey, you said you were going to email marketing about the thing. Did you email marketing about the thing? Like, no, I didn't do that. Once okay, fine. Like everybody's, particularly during a pandemic, everybody's going to have drop balls from time to time, right? The recording of action items is supposed to be a way that we help each other remember those things. But if it becomes a continuing thing, one of the phrases we have bosses practice is my expectation is, right? My expectation is that if we say a thing's going to happen, that you do whatever you need to do on your side and let me know if you need other things from me, but that you've committed to that and that thing's going to happen. And once I get it, but on an ongoing basis, this is a problem because my expectation is that the commitments we make in this room happen, right? That is very uncomfortable for some bosses to say, especially bosses like me early in my career that was so focused on the relationship.
We also see it in organizational values, right? We'll see organizations, or we'll hear from organizations that say like people are behaving in a way that is not in keeping with how they should behave within this organization. We're like, cool, where was that written down? And they're like, well, they're yelling at each other, like full on yelling at each other. They're screaming in meetings. I'm like, okay, is that, do you have it anywhere that that's not how you do within your organization, right? That the expectation in your organization is that like people are, maybe you disagree respectfully or whatever it is. And for a lot of folks, they feel like, well, that is obvious, right? Like clearly you're not going to go into a meeting and just like yell at your colleagues, but there are cultures where they do, right?
We've worked in those cultures.
We've worked in those cultures. There are cultures where that's just how you show that you're passionate about your perspective, is that you're willing to go to the mat for it. And I think for a lot of founders in particular, we have a set of things where we just like, no, that would be totally out of bounds. If you haven't written it down and you're onboarding people into your organization without saying it, somebody's gonna sort of like trip that wire, and it won't be their fault if you didn't tell them.
This is really important too, because we see this all the time, especially with love in my heart, with founders and CEOs, where they discover an expectation they didn't realize they had, where they discover a value they didn't realize they had, right? That somebody does something and they're like, oh shit, like we never wrote that down. We were never clear about it. And sometimes it's really minor stuff. Like if you ask 100 hiring managers whether they expect to receive thank you notes, 50 of them will go to the mat and be like, if you don't send me a thank you note, you're out. I don't care how great you are. And the other 50 are like, is it the 1870s? No, you don't need to send me a thank you note. Like, but that expectation is like, as a candidate, that's totally impacting my ability to get a role in your organization. And if I was raised with that, then I have that. And if I wasn't, then I don't. And like, how am I would be so happy to write a thank you note, right? But whatever it is, being able to articulate that and spot it when somebody pisses you off, be like, okay, wait, did we ever say that was a thing, right? You can say, oh, we should take some things as common sense, but we can also just be declarative.
Similarly, during lockdown, we've got bosses who are sending emails at 11 o'clock at night. Is the expectation that I respond to that email at 11 o'clock at night, or is the expectation that I wait until tomorrow morning when I'm sort of clear-headed and awake and have had coffee? And either one can be the right answer for your organization. I have a preference about which one I'd like it to be if it's an organization where I'm working, but either one can be correct. But if you haven't said it out loud, like how am I, if I'm new within your team, how do I know?
And eager to please, right? And I see an email from my boss at 11 o'clock and I just start this habit of checking my email in the middle of the night just to make sure I didn't miss anything. And my boss might be mortified to hear that that's what I'm doing because that was not their intent at all.
Just super fucking clear. Yep. Is that what you want or is that not what you want?
Yeah, that's so interesting. It reminds me of a situation that, we were discussing this at work, which was, obviously pandemic, people working from home, you have kids coming onto the screen or a dog comes in and or a cat walks over your laptop or one of these sorts of situations. And someone on our team was saying sometimes I feel embarrassed that, something like this happens. And so maybe we should have, make it permissible that people can have their video off or, or go on mute or something. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. Yeah. Why don't you just do that? It's like, oh, well, I didn't know that was okay. And it's kind of like, oh, I just assumed that everybody knew that, well, yeah, obviously everyone's at home. So clearly these things are going to happen, but it wasn't super fucking clear, like you said.
Oh, I mean, I'll give you an example, right? We're working with leaders and we're doing leadership training, management training with bosses all over the world right now. And one of the things that happens is we get on and they're like, is it okay if I chew?
Yeah.
Like, is it cool if I eat while we do training? And so we obviously shifted sort of our pattern to say out loud, of course, please feed yourselves. We don't want to teach hangry managers about sort of delivering hard feedback. That's a hard audience. But a lot of folks, I think, feel unless you've said it out loud, my I'm not sure, and I'm living in this sort of in-between space of what's okay and what's not okay.
Yeah, fundamentally every space has rules, right? And I don't mean that in an authoritarian way. I just mean that we have shared expectations. We always do. Zoom rooms are a great example, right? Where we always do. But in a context where new people are coming in, they don't know the rules. And so a fair question for any corporate culture, for any manager anywhere, is like, how are they going to learn them? And for that matter, do the five of us on my team all have the same understanding of what they are, right? So anytime we start work with a new group, for instance, we've got a set of things. We're like, here's how the conversations go in here. Here's what we're asking you all to commit to, and here's what we're committing to as well. And there's even stuff where we say, like, here's how we Zoom, right? Have the participant window open and the chat window open, because we know that some people will not put their hand up to ask a question, but they will put it in the chat. And we want everybody to sort of be in the same place, right? That kind of, you own your unmute button. If you need to jump in, just jump in. But we reserve the right to mute you if you go to the bathroom and forget to mute it. Like, maybe those things are obvious, but saying them out loud, it just lowers everybody's sort of burnout levels in a time where everybody's burnout levels are very high, and makes it clear, like, these are the rules of the space. I understand them. And we all heard Johnathan and Melissa say them together. So we're all working from the same page. I know I'm allowed to unmute if I need to. I know I'm allowed to eat if I need to.
And it's not about coddling, right? If you've got bosses listening who are like, that sounds like coddling, it's not about coddling. It's about creating the space for your people to do innovative work, right? And if you want them spending all of their brain cycles on whether it's okay to face mute or not face mute, they can spend all their brain cycles on that, but probably you've got more important challenges that you need them solving. And so the more you can relax just the noise and the shit, and sort of get that out of the way, the more opportunity you've got for folks in your organization to do really amazing work.
So there is something that I wanted to ask you, because we started off the conversation talking about accountability, acknowledging like that this is a different role and there are powers that you now have. I'm curious because one of the things that is very popular language today is servant leadership. And I think like when you just say the term servant leadership, it just sounds like it's a one-sided thing, and it almost sounds like you have no power. So I'm curious what if you agree with the concept of servant leadership, or like how you define it and how it can actually be practiced.
It's such a delicious phrase, isn't it? Servant leader. Like, if you're somebody who feels uncomfortable having power over other people, and you find this sentence, you're like, that's what I am. I'm that, right? Because it gives you a smart sounding way to give away all that power and say, oh no, we're inverting you don't report to me, I report to you. My whole job is just to get obstacles out of your way. It sounds delicious. If you want to dive into it, it comes from an essay from the 70s by Robert Greenleaf, the leader as a servant. And that essay is fine. I think it's a good thing. I think Melissa and I would both agree that the leaders should understand their role to be at least partly about helping their people thrive, right? That's a real core element of it. It's not about lording power over them. It's really about creating a space where they can be excellent. And so in that much, I totally am here for. What we've learned is that a lot of the people who use that phrase, sort of like before when we were talking about, there's just not a good manager-employee fit, a lot of the people who use servant leader as a self-describing phrase are using it as a way to give away power and have not done the work, right? That servants don't fire people. Servants don't say you're not getting a raise. Servants don't say you screwed up, and like if you do that again, I can't put you in meetings with clients anymore, right? Those are not things that a servant says, and it's worth asking yourself, like, are you doing those things? Because hard feedback is service, right? But a lot of people who take that phrase on for themselves are using it as a way to get out of the awkward parts of management.
Yeah, I think for a lot of leaders, like the idea of servant leadership comes from a really beautiful place in their own hearts, right? Like they don't want to do sort of the authoritarian, awful job of management, and they are trying to react to a set of things. But when you look at it in practice, when you sort of talk to folks who are doing that work, or folks who are managed by people who self-identify as servant leaders, often there's a massive gap in terms of whether folks are actually managed, like capital M managed. Are they doing the management, or have they sort of stand on the sidelines and are back to shit umbrella?
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable way to look at it. And it definitely is a spectrum. one of the, we had Jean-Michel, who's the CTO at Shopify, on the show. And one of the things that he mentioned was he called it like the 25, 50, 25 rule. So 25% of the time, I'm your boss and I'm going to tell you and hold you accountable and so on and so forth. 25% you're my boss and I'm going to unblock you and help you. And 50% of the time we're peers. We're going to brainstorm and work together and problem solve. And I just like that because it seemed less like there's just like a one size fits all, like this is the model, just do that. It's, and don't stray from it.
But it's hokum. It's total bullshit. Like with respect to Jean-Michel, like it's total bullshit that you are never not my boss. Even when we're peers, you can still fire me. Even when we're pretending that I'm your boss, like you can still decide whether I get a raise or not. Like there's no point in time where you as my boss are not my boss.
And it's so attractive. And I get what he's trying to say. He's trying to describe like a workflow scenario about like how many of my utterances are meant to be command utterances and how many of my utterances are meant to be consensus utterances, right? Okay, but framing matters. And it's really hard. I've been on a team with a VP Eng when I was a director Eng or a manager where we wanted to be friends and where he wanted to be friends, where he didn't want to have that sort of title, right? Where we'd go out, we traveled a lot at Mozilla, where we'd go out to the hotel bar and just talk about whatever. And like, isn't it nice that we're peers? And maybe he felt that, but I never did. You never forget that like, this is a person who can promote you or not. This is a person who's showing affinity to you. And that generally is a positive forward-looking indicator, right? And that like, if I say, no, I don't really want to do that, I'm not going to get fired probably. But I've missed, right? That might be a career limiting move to do that. And hopefully not. And hopefully that leader governs themselves in ways that is more equitable than that. But it's a dangerous signal to send. And when somebody self-describes that way, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what it's like to work for you. I don't know how true that is of the people who work for you. But I know that for me, bosses who wanted to be peers might have believed that. And I never did.
That's definitely a very different way to look at it. But I see the point. You're right. It does never change. And that's always there. And it was very interesting just to hear like the way that you put it, which is like, even if you as a manager think that you're acting like a peer, the person on the other side definitely is not. And it's easy to miss that.
It matters a lot in tech, in part because we have such blurry lines between when we're in a work context and when we're socializing. Less so during pandemic, obviously, but sort of in the before times when you leave the office and everybody's grabbing a drink. Like, are you my boss in that moment, or are you my peer? And like, if I have like a third drink and I say something foolish, is that okay? Is that not okay? Is that showing up in my performance review? Like, there's just a whole bunch around it where I would prefer that if you're in a management role, like you just recognize that the boss hat does not come off.
Yeah, we worked for a CEO part of our time at Mozilla when Mozilla was growing very quickly, and he got caught flat-footed because he would say in meetings, he'd been a designer at Apple before that, and he really liked getting into the product details. And he would say in meetings, well, have we thought about doing it this other way, right? And just ask the question. And then 3 months later, realized that there was a whole product branch built off the CEO's direction to think about going another way, right? And he's like, no, I was just asking a question, right? And it's a moment of not understanding the power that you hold in the room and wielding it really carefully, right? That it might feel cumbersome to say, I'm not asking this as the CEO, I'm just asking a design question because I'm invested in it. This is not direction. Like, that might feel like so much work, but obvious to you is not the same as obvious. It was obvious in that moment to him that he was just asking a question as a peer on the team. That is not how, employee 136, who had only ever experienced him as their manager's manager, received that feedback, right? And so it's just, I guess I would say to the people listening to the podcast, be careful. If you are tempted to self-describe that way, you can't read other people's minds, but there is a high likelihood that your team does not experience that the way you do. And you don't want to be in a position where you're self-evaluating your management very differently than your team is experiencing your management.
That is fascinating. You're right. Sometimes, and I love the framing of that's not how employee 136, who's only experienced you as, the manager's manager, is going to perceive that. So I think it's very interesting. There's this, one of the guests that we had on board was talking about her experience with doing stand-up comedy, and one of the things that she brought up is, like, in order to be a very effective comedian, you have to first understand how the audience is going to perceive you. Like, when they look at you, just like by looking at you, how do they kind of perceive you, and some of the stereotypes that they might associate with you, and then, like, you have to understand that first before you can start to communicate. And I feel like it is the same if you're a manager, you're a CEO, you're a VP. There's a lot that comes, and you kind of have to understand that before you start to communicate.
I love that. I think that makes a ton of sense, and is a much better framing of it to say, like, I think any manager at any level of seniority would be better at their job if they started by saying, like, that. What is it when I come into a room? What is it when I ask a question? What is it when I send an email? And from that place, how do I adjust the conversation I'm having to acknowledge that?
We also talk to leaders about this idea that there's like a trifecta of needs that we're always trying to balance, which is like, who am I? What does my team need from me as a leader? Like, who am I as a leader? What does my team need from me as a leader? And then what does the organization as a whole need from me as a leader? And sometimes those things are like super well aligned, and sometimes they're way out of step. And for a lot of leaders, like, just figuring out sort of how to manage that triangle of needs, I think it can be really helpful.
It will not surprise you to hear that, anytime we're working with bosses, one of the first things we open with is, like, here are practical skills that you can learn on Tuesday and apply on Wednesday. That's really important, right? Not just because there are real skills and we want them to have those skills, but also because seeing that investing in your management can pay off is a really important entry point. But by the end of our programs, more of the work is on who am I as a leader, and is it working for me, right? Like, I tend to bias all the way towards consensus, and it means my team loves me, but it means we're very slow to reach decisions. Is that good or bad? And if I don't think that's working for me, how can I be intentional about moving it? Right? That self-awareness is, it's a good predictor of long-term management success, but it's hard. It is some work that is different than learning the skills, but also really important.
Yeah, and it's also the sort of thing that is, I get the sense it's not a one and done. It's a constant. I mean, self-awareness, I feel like, is a spectrum. It's probably like driving, in that everybody thinks they're better than average, but it's a spectrum, and you're always working on it. One thing I did want to, ask you as we're getting close to time is you have this amazing newsletter. And you were just telling me about the domain name. What is the domain name again?
Shopping for domains is the best.
Yeah, the domain name is worldsbestnewsletter.com, and I have no idea still why that was available for purchase.
Problem solved.
And
right?
it was like one of those like $3.99 domains that was just sort of kicking around. I'm like, how has nobody scooped this up?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can find it on our corporate site, right? It's on rawsignal.ca, but worldsbestnewsletter.com is the one that people remember.
Yeah.
And, the thing I really love about your newsletter is that it's, there's a lot of, we always know what's on top of your mind, the latest and greatest things that you've read, and your commentary about. So it feels very current. So it's not just management, but it's also like management with a current lens. And there is this one, I guess, like, issue where you talked about this concept of borrowing from your future self, and I thought it was just like a very clever way to phrase the concept, and I'd love for you to talk about what it means to borrow from your future self for leaders.
I mean, this is something that we were seeing a lot, where we're talking to you in March, right? So it's about a year into lockdowns and a lot of leaders leading from a pandemic place. And one of the things that we were seeing was that more of the bosses that we were talking to wanted to talk about burnout, not only for their own teams, but for themselves. And it wasn't like a little shift. It was like a 400% increase in terms of the number of times we would hear burnout in conversation with bosses.
Yeah, I don't know I'm careful about using a word like dire, but like a lot of the bosses that we were talking to are trying their best. But the questions we're getting, it's not just about like, how do I help an employee with burnout? It's how do I help all my employees with burnout when I'm also burnt out, right? There's a real depth to it. And there's so many articles out there that say, well, you need self-care. You just need to, if you need to take a break for a couple hours, just give yourself a massage in your chair or whatever, you should do that. And that's great. That sounds great. But many of the bosses that we talk to can't. They're slammed because like they don't have casual conversations anymore. Everything has to be a Zoom call. And so their Zoom calls are getting time sliced, 15 minutes, 10 minutes at a time. And their workday has increased by 2 or 3 hours a day. And there's no room for it. And so we said, okay, so maybe present you is screwed. Maybe present you, your calendar's totally booked up, right? But we need to start to build systems in place because it can't keep going this way. It's not sustainable. And so that's when we started talking about FutureU.
Yeah. And how do you put in the things in place today? Like we were talking to leaders who were so underwater that their HR team would be like, take a vacation, just take a couple comp days, like sign off, unplug, turn off Slack, whatever, it's going to be okay. They would take the days and they would have like a week of Sunday scaries, right? Where they're just the feeling in their gut was so much stress at what they'd be coming back to that they didn't even get any of the sort of relaxation or any of the benefit of taking a weekend unplugging because it was all dominated by the anxiety of what they'd face when they came back. And so we started saying like, you can't fix that in that moment, but you can start to build forward. And as you're thinking about what it's like to build forward, just looking at your calendar and saying like, where are there decisions that I can make right now in service of my future self? So if I am a team lead and I'm responsible for individual contribution and responsible for management, and I don't have any more flow to be able to do my own work, like if your flow isn't on the calendar, your flow isn't happening, or your flow is happening like after hours at 9 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night. And so just talking to leaders about like, where can you build it back in so that when you go to reach for it, it's there.
That's it. The core idea of that newsletter was that if you look forward, maybe it's next week for you, maybe it's a month out, there's some place on your calendar that still has room, right? Even with all the recurring meetings, a lot of what's eating up our days right now is the little drive-bys. They're like, hey, can I just get some time today, right? But the nice thing about those is that those people asking for time will route around the existing blocks in your calendar. And so a thing that you can do is you can look a couple weeks ahead to where there is some space, and you can start to block that off and say, this week sucks. It sucks for the same reason that last week sucked, right? But 3 weeks out, I've actually got some room, and we're way overdue to do some team planning or to think about like, we haven't even written 2021 corporate goals yet, whatever the thing is, and say like, I'm going to block time there. And it's not perfect, right? I think one of the greatest crimes that Google has ever committed is that when somebody sends you a calendar invite, it automatically gets added to your calendar. And so everybody else gets to control your time, and that's really hard. But most people will avoid the existing blocks. They'll try and find the white space on your calendar and book something in there. And so if you've got a private block in there, or if it's going to be suspicious to have a private block, schedule it with the peer and say, this is our 2-hour sync up. And just the two of you are helping each other now, right? Because you've both got that. And you can be on Zoom together quietly typing or not. But finding that protection is a thing that you can do today to help future you, because current you has already been screwed by past you.
I love that framing. It's so nice to be able to refer to these as different people. It just allows you to think about things in a different way. I love that. Melissa, Johnathan, this has been incredible. So many great insights and so many things to kind of reference, and I'm excited to share this with everyone. One question that we always leave our speakers and our audience with is what parting advice, resources, tips, or just words of wisdom would you have for all the managers and leaders out there looking to get better at their craft?
I mean, I'd say right now, a lot of leaders, the part that we tend to be the tool that we tend to sort of overuse, or the muscle that tends to be overworked in our own management practice, is the down orientation, right? Is I as a manager focusing on my team and the people who report to me. And the muscle that's underdeveloped right now, particularly because we're not physically seeing those people in person, is the across muscle. The across management muscle for most organizations is essentially the success or failure of that organization. But for a lot of leaders, I don't see those people. They are far from me. I'm not in meetings with them. I'm connected to my own team, but the connection and the link between myself as a leader and the other leaders in the organization, they've atrophied. Now is a great time to go reinvest in building those muscles.
Yeah, not just because it's nice to know what other people are working on, but because it's very hard to prioritize for your own team if you don't know how it connects to other pieces, right? That when everybody's fried and you're like, something's got to drop, you're the one we're paying to have the broader context. You're the one who's got to see what's going on in other parts of the org so that I know as a person on your team which things I can put down and which things we absolutely have to deliver because other parts of the organization are counting on us. And we've got so much space for how hard it is to do that right now. But it's the thing that only you can do, that your team can't do for you, that you can't delegate off because you're in different meetings than they are.
And for a lot of folks, like part of how we help FutureU is we stop doing work twice. And in a lot of organizations right now, we're doing work twice because we just don't have the ambient awareness of where the other work is happening within the organization.
And the last thing I think I'd say on that is that, maybe obviously because of the work that we do, but if you're a boss and you've never gotten any training, you're not alone. 80% of the leaders out there have never had any training. The stat is that between the first time you get management as a job and the first time you get training, it's about 12 years.
Wow.
So most of the people doing it have never been taught how to do it. You're not alone on that, but it's not fair, right? And so whether you got to talk to HR, whether you've got internal tools, whether you can get mentorship from somebody more senior, finding some way to start building some systems around this stuff is how you get yourself above water. Like, it's a learnable set of skills. It's not just a natural thing that you're born with or not born with. And so if you're struggling with it right now, get some help on learning those fundamentals. It's gonna unlock some stuff for you.
I say, like, nobody comes out of the womb knowing how to direct the work of a group of highly creative and generative individuals. Like, it's just not a thing that most people are born knowing how to do. And so if it isn't, well, then it's learnable.
Everybody says we would say that because that's our job, but it's the other way around. That's our job because we know how powerful it is.
Yeah, I love that. And a great place to end it. Melissa, Johnathan, thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Aiden.
Thank you
This was
so
a lot of
much.
fun.